Thank you very much for that introduction, Chairman, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here today to speak on the topic of agriculture and food, and I think the subject was a lot done and more to do. The title, it's a very familiar slogan, and it's from a different time perhaps, but what it did make me think about was what have we achieved in farming, where are we today, and what more do we need to do to realise the potential of the sector? If we begin with the positives, what do we have in Ireland? We have a model of family farming which contributes to economic and social activity in every parish in Ireland. And if we take our immediate surroundings, for example, it's mainly hill farming being done around here on marginal land. There's also grazing in the valley between Glenties and Ardara. And even in Glenties here itself, we have the Glenside Bacon Factory. So it's evidence of the far reach of employment of agriculture in the food industry. As shown in a recent UCD report, with a high output multiplier and low import content, and with most of the income that farmers generate being spent locally, growth in agriculture has a hugely positive effect on the rest of the economy. In addition to that, agricultural production in Ireland is more sustainable than many of our other exporting countries with our grass-based production system. And as consumers and policymakers become more aware of where our food comes from and how it's been produced, this is an advantage that we can further capitalise on into the future. Now, it's been said many times this week already, and it's been said because it's true. It's our exporting sectors that are going to contribute to our economic recovery. And recent figures show that the growth demonstrated by agriculture and the agri-food sector in 2010 is continuing on into 2011, with output growth at primary agriculture level and export growth of food and drinks far outpacing that of the rest of the economy. In our Food Harvest 2020 report published last year, industry leaders identified the potential for agriculture to increase farm gate output by 1.5 billion and to increase exports to 12 billion within the decade. The growth recorded in 2010 and early 2011 demonstrate that we are actually on track to achieve this target. However, if we are to continue this growth, there are a number of challenges that must be addressed from a farming perspective. First and foremost, farming must be profitable if we're going to attract and retain talented and committed farmers. And farm profitability is determined by a number of factors. These include the scale of the farm enterprise, the price received for the product, the cost of inputs, and the policy supports for farming that are in place. We also need to decide what form of farming do we want in Ireland in the future. And I strongly believe that our ambition should be the retention of the family farm structure, but with the objective of full employment for the farmer. Whether this is solely achieved at primary agriculture, whether it's going to be supplemented by value-added on-farm activities, or through off-farm employment. I wish to look specifically now at two challenges at farm level which, if tackled correctly, will contribute to future sustainability and growth. These are, number one, the need to improve competitiveness even at farm level through structural change, and dealing with increasing product price and input cost volatility. Now, if we're going to achieve our Food Harvest 2020 targets, there needs to be a sustained improvement in competitiveness at farm level. The major barriers to achieving this are actually structural, in particular the relatively small size of Irish farms, low land mobility, and the unfavourable age structure of Irish farming. Only 7% of our farmers are aged under 35, and over 25% of them are aged over 65. Where these older farmers are single, with no dependents, there may often be no obvious successor. And what this means then is it's going to slow the pace of lifetime transfer or even prevent it occasionally. However, on the other side, as mentioned by the Chairman, demand from young people for training in education and agriculture and to follow farming as a career is higher than it has been in decades. We see this by the numbers applying for the Teagasc education courses and the increase in points at university level for agriculture courses. In terms of farm structure, we have an average farm structure of about 32 hectares. It's larger than the EU average of 12 hectares, smaller than the scale operated in other countries such as the USA, Australia and New Zealand. But we do have more to do, because figures from the National Farm Survey would show us that over the last number of years, an average farm size of about 40 hectares was needed to achieve the average industrial wage in dairy farming. And much larger scale is needed in other enterprises such as cattle, sheep and tillage. In addition, farm fragmentation remains an issue, with an average of about 3.5 land parcels per farm. What has improved is land mobility in renting, with about 33% of our farms renting in land at the moment. What hasn't improved is land mobility in terms of transfer of farm ownership on the open market. Last year, only about 40,000 acres, or less than half of 1% of the total agricultural land, was offered for sale. So what are the measures then required to encourage restructuring and investment in agriculture by both new entrants and existing farmers? Because it's worth noting, we look to the future, we look to what new entrants can do, but an awful lot of the growth and output growth that we're going to achieve over the next decade is going to be by the existing talented farmers that we have in place. Well, first of all, government investment in primary agriculture is vital. And I welcome the commitment in the programme for government to promote greater land mobility, involvement of young farmers and achieving the food harvest targets. But while much of our agricultural policy is determined at EU level, I do believe that the main responsibility for policies to improve the structure of farming lie with our national government. And I want to look now at some of the specific measures that are required. As noted earlier, over 25% of our farmers today are aged over 65, and many of these have no obvious successor. So what we need to do is foster a system which encourages farmers to transfer their farm within their lifetime, and which does not financially penalise the farmer to whom the farm is transferred. So how is this done? We need to remove, or at least significantly reduce, the perverse incentives that are preventing lifetime transfers from occurring. A great example of this is stamp duty, which is paid on lifetime transactions and not paid upon inheritance. So how the system operates at the moment is, if you're a farmer, a young trained farmer aged under 35, you can benefit from stamp duty relief, and it provides a great incentive to transfer the farm. Once you go over that age, the incentive is gone, and it actually makes more financial sense to hold off on the farm transfer until inheritance. Stamp duty is also providing a barrier to land mobility in general. So the solution that I propose for this is to reduce stamp duty rates for farmland across the board, thereby increasing the numbers of transactions, incentivising lifetime transfers, and generally increasing efficiency at farm level. For inter-family transfers, and that is how the majority of our farms are transferred, the capital gains tax relief for the existing farmer and the agricultural relief from capital acquisitions tax for the recipient are significant incentives that exist at the moment. However, we're acutely aware that under the EU and IMF programme, capital taxes are due to be reformed in this year's budget. The retention of the capital gains tax relief and the agricultural relief at its current rate of 90% for active farmers is very important. A reduction in the rate of the agricultural relief would most negatively affect our larger and more commercial farms, possibly leading up to the breakup of family farms or the selling of assets to pay the tax liability. This makes absolutely no sense when it is these farms which are going to produce an awful lot of the increased output that we need. And finally, on that area, as a complementary non-taxation measure, I believe that the reintroduction of a targeted young farmer and succession programme should form part of the rural development programme after 2013. On promoting land mobility, it's important for us to remember that land mobility is not just about the transfer of ownership. It's the transfer of use is very important as well. In a number of EU countries, long-term land rental is common, thereby allowing farmers to increase their scale without incurring major capital expenditure and debt. In Ireland here, we do have an encouragement for transferring land use from less productive to more productive farming. This is the land leasing tax exemption scheme. And under this scheme, landowners who lease out their land for periods of 5 years or more, which is very good farming practice for the person who will be leasing the land, they qualify for varying levels of income tax exemption. The scheme is directed at part-time and elderly farmers who do not farm at the same level as full-time commercial farmers. There is great potential for the further development of this scheme if it is properly promoted. And I think one of the things that could be considered in doing this is a development maybe of some form of national clearinghouse system, which would bring together potential lessors and lessees. On farm fragmentation, I mentioned we have an average of 3.5 parcels per land, or per farm. It's not particularly efficient, and one would say, well, what is stopping farmers from consolidating their farms? The reality is it is a capital gains tax liability that a farmer will face even if he swaps land that is preventing this from happening. If we're really serious about farming efficiently, then the introduction of capital gains tax relief for the purpose of farm consolidation should definitely be considered. And finally, across all farms, farming is a capital-intensive profession and it requires regular reinvestment. Capital allowances and stock relief remain important incentives for on-farm investment, particularly given that most farm businesses are operated as sole traders, and therefore there is a very high marginal rate of tax being faced by farmers. And given the output growth that's required in Food Harvest 2020, I believe the argument for the retention of these reliefs is stronger than ever before. The second key issue that I would like to look at today that I believe will impact on the long-term viability of the family farm structure are the decisions that are going to be taken by policymakers and the entire agri-food industry over the coming years to deal with volatility. Price and income volatility at farm level has increased greatly in recent years, with the reform of the CAP, the removal of price supports and increased exposure of farmers to world market prices. What we've seen is that not only is there a price cycle for the farm product, there is also an input cost cycle, and these often occur at different times. We've seen this most clearly in recent times with the pig meat sector, where input costs have risen significantly and the product price has not matched it. As noted by the Chairman earlier, in 2007, average farm incomes were €20,000. By 2009, they'd fallen by 40% to €12,000. We've had a recovery in prices, and in 2010, most of this ground was regained. But what we're seeing now in 2011 is that rising incomes from product prices will most likely be diluted by increased input costs. And I suppose what these figures show, not only I suppose they demonstrate the low-income profession that farming is at the moment, what these figures show is that making business decisions on one year's accounts is no longer a runner, and we need to get serious about dealing with volatility. So beginning at farm level, I really do feel that continuous professional development to improve management capability, understand costs and empower farmers is vital. The involvement of farmers in discussion groups, mainly provided by Teagasc, has proven a hugely successful form of peer learning. Farmers need to look for and get not just value for money, but also high-quality advice from the service providers they use, such as solicitors and accountants. And these professionals must be up to date on taxation, legislative and other policy developments that are affecting farm businesses. Farmers should also consider the opportunities that may exist to reduce costs and spread risk through group purchasing and selling. It's vital that we have a banking sector that adapts to this changed price environment. First and foremost, as a baseline, access to credit at a competitive price remains vital for farm businesses, for small businesses, for all businesses. Business plans must now be developed and assessed on a multi-year basis. And I think banks must start to become flexible to allow farmers to take advantage of volatility, for example, by extending working capital to allow a farmer to buy forward when input costs are the right price. Farmers overall need a responsive and an appropriate banking system if they are going to survive volatile market conditions and sustain their business. At the agri-food industry level, there must be further development of market-based risk management instruments. The move towards providing some stability on producer prices through instruments including contracts and forward selling is very positive, as it provides farmers with greater certainty and allows them to make longer-term investment decisions. If these instruments are to be effective, however, there must be also some certainty provided in relation to input costs. It's in the interest both of the processors and the farmers to ensure stability of supply in this way. There is much debate and no small amount of disagreement among policymakers at EU level about what should be the steps taken to address food price volatility. Among the proposed solutions are increased market information, improvement of long-term agricultural productivity, development of risk management tools, and even possibly regulation of commodity derivatives markets. But implementing any of these solutions is going to take time, resources, and no small amount of cooperation among governments and the agri-food industry, with no certainty yet of how effective they will be. I think the Irish Government and policymakers must keep informed of and contribute to the debate and to the development of solutions appropriate to the Irish farming and agri-food sector. Of much more immediate effect is going to be the results of the CAP reform negotiations. It is critical that the importance of the single farm payment in providing cushioning against income volatility and providing stability in production is highlighted. Going back to 2009, that terrible year, that year almost all farmers received a price for their product below the cost of production, and direct payments accounted for 143% of farm income. In fact, it's estimated that about €660 million of farm gate output wouldn't actually have occurred in the absence of direct payments that year. And for certain enterprises, such as cattle and sheep farming, direct payments are required always to support production. It's very important we don't forget that, and that we argue very strongly for a strong single farm payment in the negotiations. In addition to that, when a collapse in the market occurs, as happened with the dairy market in 2009, emergency market support measures, such as intervention and export supports, are critical to put a floor under prices, to stop the drop. These must be strengthened in the CAP post-2013 to increase their effectiveness and the swiftness of their implementation. There are other forms of risk management tools that are being considered, such as insurance funds. I believe these are probably more appropriate to other member states which have more severe weather conditions, for example. And I think that these measures should remain voluntary at member state level. As a first principle, I believe the support should go directly to the producer to allow them to make their production decisions. Other challenges that face the farming sector, which I have not covered today, include the need for continued funding for the key farm schemes. These include REPS and the EOS, disadvantaged areas and the suckler cow scheme. These schemes support not only farm incomes and production, but also the provision by farmers of non-market public goods, including enhancement of the environment, increased biodiversity and high animal welfare standards, standards that we as consumers want to see. There is also the potential threat posed by international trade deals and the general challenge posed by the economic downturn with the loss of off-farm employment opportunities for part-time farmers in particular. In making decisions about the use of scarce resources, government must look at the sectors that are already delivering and have the potential to further deliver economic growth and the achievement and retention of Irish rural communities. Primary agriculture, which underpins the entire agri-food sector, has this potential. We can enhance this potential through supporting restructuring and equipping the sector to deal with volatility. A sustainable and more efficient farming sector will be the result. Thank you very much for your attention.